Hi, thanks for checking out ServerCyde. Today we're going to walk through how we built a simple real-time chat application using the ServerCyde library to build the application completely in client-side JavaScript. The homepage is a simple sign-up form, and to sign up we're going to need the user calls, which are servercyde.user.signup. And in the test form, we can see it needs email address, name, password, and a Boolean remember me. And a sample of what it will return. It's returning false right now because it's in testing mode. If you submitted the form with an error, it would say false, name is required, email is required, and all the errors for you to display. So here is our simple form, the post or the sign up button, jQuery library. We're using the jQuery mobile library as well, and the API specific to your site, which you can get on the ServerCyde dashboard right here, the code to put on your page. The script to handle the sign up is just wiring up the sign up button on click to run an add user function, which is the same call that we just tested, passing in a serialized form using the jQuery serialize method, and then running our user created function upon success. The user creation function demonstrates another built-in call, which is user.details, which will return the user ID, email address, and name. And here we're checking to make sure that the ID is greater than 0 so that it's an actual user, and then handling it from there. The next step would be to go to the room if there was a room ID indicated, and I'll go to that page. It's asking me to sign up. The chat room consists of a list view with all the messages and a post box. So what we're going to need is a way to create rooms, a way to select all the messages in the room, and a way to post new messages. So 3 pretty simple calls. We start by creating a domain for messages and for rooms. Users is not needed for this application. It's already handled by ServerCyde, and we recommend, if it's your first time using Amazon SimpleDB, check out the API documentation just to get familiar with what's going on behind the scenes. So to create a room, we're going to go create a call called upsert room. We gave it the nickname upsert room, tied it to the domain rooms. The item name for a new room is going to be a short GUID. So we've passed in this token. We can also pass in tokens like the current user ID, IP address, or a long GUID. We could make this modify call a delete or batch function. But what we wanted to do was pass in the user ID so I know who created the room. It's going to replace the value with the current user ID. We want the name of the user. No default value here because we want to pass in the name of the chat room. as well as the description of the chat room. There's no conditions needed for this call, but you could add them for other calls. The other one we need is to add a chat, and again we're just giving the chat a short GUID. We need to pass in the room ID so we know which room the chats are living in. We need to know what the message is. We're going to pass that in, and for fun we put in the IP address just to sort of track people and demonstrate passing an IP address. User ID again. Current username so that we can show the name of the person who's entered a message and the time that they entered the message. Current time. And the current time saves the time in milliseconds since epoch, standard Linux or JavaScript time. Once we're in a room, we're going to need to get all of the room messages, and this is a select query. What we have here is a code by example where you choose what domain it is, checkbox for the attributes that you want to return, whether they are a count field or not, and it gets updated in real time here so that you can see the select query that you are creating. All the things you'd normally need, limit, consistent read, sort by options. For this select query, we want to get all of the message where a room ID equals the room ID that we're going to pass in. Pardon me. And where the time is greater than 0. And we do that because with Amazon Simple DB, you can only sort by columns or attributes that are also in the where clause. And we do mention that here. There's some other tips to take a look at. Now we can also do a test. It shows you a sample API usage, or you can run a test, which will open up the same form, and it pre-populates these values. You can pass them in that way, or you can leave them blank. And here, the response for this, it returns the item name, which is going to be that short GUID, so that you can use the new identity that you've just put in for something. The select query we can also test. Room ID, let's take a look at room ID UK, time 0, and we get all of the attributes and values for each of the messages in the room returned in JSON for us to process. So how do we process this data? Pretty simply, in jQuery we iterate over each item and create a new HTML element for a list item and put in those values. If it's a name, insert the name. If it's a user ID, insert the name into a rel attribute. If it's a message, insert the message, and so forth. The other thing we want to do is get the title of the room posted up here, and for that we use a get attributes call. Pretty similar to the select. You add the attributes that you want returned, and the item name you can leave it blank if you want to pass in the item name, or if it needs to be the current user ID or an IP address, you can put those tokens in there too. And here we run the simpledb.getRoom call, matches up with the API usage here, servercyde.simpledb.getRoom, and we insert that room. Now for the real-time chat function, we use the comment feature. To subscribe, you run servercyde.comment.subscribe. You need to pass in a channel name. We're going to use the room ID as a channel, and a function for whenever something gets published. And we're going to run a function that gets the room messages using the current room ID, and then shows those messages when it's returned. To post something, we wire up the post button to save DB function, which is again one line, the upsert chat call, which is going to pass in the chat data, the room ID, and then run the comment call publish. Publish to channel is servercyde.comment.publish, and we pass in the channel that we want to publish to and the data that we want to pass in there, and a function to return after it's completed. Here we're going to disable the post button as soon as it's clicked, and then enable it after the message has been published. And that gives us a working application. Thanks for checking us out.